John, thanks so much for being on the show. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great. I'm in upstate New York. It's freezing, but I'm doing good.
Okay, John. Of course, I want to ask you about music, but first of all, I would like to get to know you a little bit better. Was there any music at home when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, my dad had a record player and he had like a small bin of records. And most of the stuff that he would play, my dad's an old Italian guy. So he would play Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and all these like old Italian crooner kind of singers. And so when I was growing up, that was the only music in the house. But there was one record in my dad's record collection. I don't know, to this day, seriously, I don't know how it got there. I don't know who. I never heard him play the record once. I don't know if he bought it or if someone gave it to him. I don't know how he got it, but it was the Rolling Stones record, Between the Buttons. And it was the only rock record he had in his whole entire collection. But I remember picking up that record and they just looked so cool on the cover. They were all dressed like 60s mod and they had the cool, like long haircuts with the bangs. And I was really intrigued by this record, and it had the song Ruby Tuesday on it, that Rolling Stone song. And I tell you, I played that record. I remember being like 5 or 6 years old and just playing that record over and over again. It was the first rock and roll I had ever heard, music with like guitars in it even. And man, I was just obsessed with that record. I played it over and over and over and over and over again. And that was really like my first taste into like, rock music. But it had a big impression on me. But there wasn't much rock and roll listened to in my house when I was growing up, except for the music that I listened to.
Okay, so I assume maybe punk rock and hardcore came later, at the time you were learning to play guitar, right?
It's strange because I got into punk really young. The neighborhood where all the kids played together. Like, it was a neighborhood with a lot of families and a lot of kids. Like nowadays, you don't even like barely know the people in your neighborhood, but I knew everybody in my neighborhood. All the kids played together. Whether you were an older kid and younger kids, we all played together. So there were some older kids in the neighborhood, and they would give me like Led Zeppelin records, Jethro Tull records, and all just kind of like classic rock kind of records. And I used to take them home and I loved them. Like, I just would listen to Led Zeppelin, and the guitars were so loud and great. And, I really loved just like that kind of classic rock stuff. And then he gave me Kiss Alive. That band Kiss, they put in the makeup. And I listened to that Kiss Alive record, and it was so wild. They were in like makeup, and the guitars were like really loud and distorted. And they even had some faster songs. And so I just fell in love with Kiss. So, most of the kids from my generation, we all just loved Kiss because, they were so crazy and wild and, dressed up and had the makeup and spit blood and stuff like that. So I got to see Kiss when I think I was 10 years old. And I got to see Kiss at Madison Square Garden on, it was 1979. I was a little kid. I got to see Kiss. And that was it. Like, when I saw Kiss, and I thought Ace Frehley was so cool, the guitar player Ace Frehley. From that second that I got home from that Kiss concert, the only objective that I had in life was to be in a band. Like, that's all I wanted to do. I was like, I'm 10 years old now. I don't even know any instruments, but someday I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be in a band. I swear it. And so it made a really big impression on me seeing Kiss. Like, I really wanted to be in a band, and I wanted to do what they did. Like, I wanted to get on stage and play music and have, like, there was such a big reaction from the crowd. It was like, they would sing that song, I want to rock and roll all night. And they would turn on all the lights and the band stopped playing except for the drums. And you could just hear, 20,000 people singing, I want to rock and roll. And it was such a magical thing. You know, that's the magic of music. It's like, it's not just the band is just up there playing music. It's the effect that the music has on the audience and the energy that the audience gives back to the band. You know, that's really like the magic of music. It's the communication and the vibration between the band and the crowd, which really makes it so magical. And so I felt it that night. That was the first concert I ever saw. And I swore that I was going to be in a band. And shortly after that, when I was like 11 years old or 12 years old or something like that, I got into punk. So I got into punk really early. And there was just something about punk, you know, that old punk like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Clash. Man, oh man, oh man, it just really spoke to me. I don't know. I threw all my Kiss records out. I was like, Kiss is over. Once I heard the Sex Pistols, Kiss is over forever. Now I'm a punk rocker. And so I really got into punk, and it was the rebelliousness and the energy of punk. And man, I just fell in love with it.
Great, man. And of course, you were shocked by Kiss, and you were discovering artists, and you went on to perform and tour the world many, many times with your partner in crime, Ray Cappo. Do you remember how you met him?
Yeah, I'll never forget the day that I met him. I was really into punk and hardcore, but, you know, I lived in upstate New York. So I lived in this place called Westchester, which is like the suburbs of New York City, and it's about 45 minutes away from New York City. And when I was growing up, New York City was, it was a dangerous place. I mean, now you go to Manhattan, and Manhattan's beautiful, and there's all, you know, it's like a playground for rich people, basically. You know, it's very, very safe, very, very rich. Even the Lower East Side, you know, where CBGB's used to be, that used to be such a dangerous neighborhood. But, you know, in like the 70s and the 80s, New York City was a crime-ridden, drug-infested place filled with burnt-out buildings. You know, it was really bad in New York City. So my dad would never, ever, ever let me go to New York City. It's just like, no, there's no way you're going to New York City. It's too dangerous. And in retrospect, it was true. Like, there's no reason some 14-year-old kid should ever go to New York City by himself, because you'd probably not come back. So I couldn't go to New York City, but I heard there was shows in Connecticut. And so Connecticut was a way more safer place than New York City. So my dad used to let me go to shows in Connecticut. So there was a club in Stamford that was called the Anthrax. And the first time I went there, I walked in. We got there really early. We got there like 2 hours before the show started. But the club was still open, but there was barely any people there. But I walked into the club, and literally the first person I saw was Ray Cappo. They had the shows were downstairs in the basement, and then upstairs they had like it looked like a living room. Like it had couches and tables and stuff and lamps. And I walked in, I looked in the door, and there sitting on the couch was Ray Cappo. And he had a mohawk, but it was really like thick mohawk. It wasn't like a thin mohawk. It was like a thick mohawk. And it was long. His hair was long and curly and dyed black. So he had this long, curly, dyed black mohawk. And he was wearing a Boy Scouts uniform, like, you know, for like kids. So, you know, that was like a punk rock thing to do. And he was, you know, I was straight edge back, you know, this was probably, I think I was around 16. I think I just turned 16 when I met him. And I was straight edge, and I was into bands like Minor Threat and 7 Seconds and Youth Brigade and all those, like SSD and DYS and all the first wave of straight edge hardcore bands. I was really into those bands. And, I didn't know anybody that was straight edge. Like literally, you know, maybe me and, you know, there's a couple other kids in my school that kind of got into straight edge for like 2 weeks and then they got out of it, but no one I knew was really serious about straight edge. So when I went to that show, I had an X on my hand and I had a skateboard. And I walked into the club, I looked up, and there sitting on the couch was Ray Capo, and he had X's on his hands, and he had a skateboard. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, there's another person that's straight edge. And I ran into the club, and I walked up to the first thing I said to him, I said, are you straight edge? I don't even know why I asked, because he had X's on his hands. But he said, yeah. And I said, you want to go skate in the parking lot? And he said, yeah. And literally from that second, we became really, really good friends. And we just met. We were talking about what kind of music we liked. And he was already in a band. He was in a band called Violent Children, but he played drums. But I remember seeing his band a couple of weeks later, and I just thought, this is so cool. Like my new friend, this kind of cool straight edge kid that I met at the club, he's in a band. Like I want to be in a band. And it was around that time that I started my first punk band, which was called the Young Republicans. And so I finally fulfilled that dream from when I was 10 and I saw Kiss and I started a band. Yeah, so that's how I met him.
Well, that's awesome, man. That's a great story. And John, I would like to know a little bit about you on a spiritual level. Do you remember how did you approach the Krishna consciousness?
Yeah, I always had known about Krishna consciousness and Hare Krishna from the Cro-Mags, because the Cro-Mags were a big band in the scene. We loved the Cro-Mags. They were like an incredible band. And I remember I remember hearing that they were, the Cro-Mags were super tough street kids. You know what I mean? They lived in squats. They grew up on the streets, real tough. Type of kids you didn't want to mess with. And then I found out that they were into this kind of spiritual path. And it was a little bit like I couldn't quite figure it out, because here are these kids, and they're always getting in fights and stuff like that, but yet they're into spirituality. And it didn't seem like to add up to me. Like I couldn't quite figure out, because my idea of people that were very spiritual were people that were very peaceful and people that, were against violence and against things like that. But those guys were serious about it. I really understood that they were serious about it when one time the first time I eventually joined Ray's band Violent Children, and he played drums, I played guitar, and we played CBGBs with the Cro-Mags. It was like a real big break for us. And this was before the Cro-Mags even had a demo out. Like nobody really knew who the Cro-Mags were. So we played at CBGB's with them, and that was the first time I saw them, and I was like, man, this band is so incredible. And then they played CBGB's again, and I was like, I gotta go back and see that band, the Cro-Mags. They were so good. And by that time their demo had came out. They had a demo that was on cassette, and we loved that demo. It was before Age of Quarrel came out, and they played CBGB's again. And I went there, and they had all Hare Krishna devotees that were inside of CBGB's, and they were selling books, and they were giving away prasadam, which is vegetarian food that's cooked with love and devotion to Krishna, and then it's offered on an altar. And according to Vedic philosophy or Krishna philosophy, when you cook, the consciousness of the person that's cooking, it actually enters into the food. So if you're in an angry mood, a frustrated mood, a bad mood, and you cook, that consciousness of frustration and anger, it actually goes into the food. And people that eat that food, they pick up on that vibration of the anger. Because we don't make anything. We don't make the sunshine. We don't make rain. We don't make seeds. Our job in growing food is very easy. We take a seed and we put it in the ground. We don't make the ground. We don't make the sun. We don't make the rain. We don't make the seed. We basically are just cooperators in this, from all these gifts that come from God, basically. So when you're cooking food in a mood of love and devotion to Krishna, thinking, I'm going to offer this food back to Krishna in gratitude, because I understand that even food itself is a gift from above. And even the things that sustain us, they're gifts from Krishna. So food that's cooked like that is very special food. It's called prashadam, vegetarian food that's cooked with love and devotion. It's offered with gratitude on an altar to Krishna. And that food, it has a great potency to re-spiritualize your consciousness. So I was just like a little kid. I was probably, 16, 17 years old, wandering into CBGB's to see this band, the Cro-Mags. And there's all these Hare Krishna devotees in the back by the pool table. If you ever went to CBGB's, they had a pool table in the back. And they were giving away free food, and they were chanting, they were singing the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, and they were selling books. And I remember I walked up, and they were all in like robes. They all had beads, and they were chanting on their beads. And I remember just walking in and just being enamored by these monks, because it was so weird. Here's a punk show with this like band. The Cro-Mags are like the most ferocious band in the world. And yet contrasted to that were all these like peaceful monks that were sitting in the back giving away free food. And I remember I went up there and I got the plate of food and just thinking like, this is the coolest thing in the world. Like, I love these guys. And they gave me this food, and the food was delicious. And I wasn't even a vegetarian then, but they gave me the food, and they said, this is vegetarian food. This is vegetarian food. And I remember thinking like, wow, this vegetarian food is so delicious. So even that was one of the things that was a really important part of me eventually becoming a vegetarian. And so that just had a big impression on me, like those monks and their singing and giving away free food as service. And I was just really impressed with them. And I was kind of, from that moment on, I was really curious to find out what this whole Krishna thing was about. And so later on in life, when I started to get interested in spirituality and what's life all about, what's the purpose of life, I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, which was one of the books that I got from the Krishnas on the street. And I bought the Bhagavad Gita and I started to read it. And I think that was just the beginning of it.
John, what was the best thing about owning a record label?
A schism?
Yeah.
Putting out the records of the bands that you loved. It was really fun too, because Schism kind of started almost like it was never intended to be a record label. Like we started Schism Records what we wanted to do is, when I was growing up, there was music magazines that would come out. They don't really do this anymore, but in the music magazine, they would have a flexi disc. So when me and Alex Brown from Gorilla Biscuits, we had a fanzine called Schism, and we thought it would be a really cool idea to have a flexi disc inside of the record. So we were going to have a New York hardcore compilation, and we were going to get all the bands from New York hardcore, and we were going to have them record a song, and then we were going to put it on a flexi disc, and we were going to put it out in the Schism fanzine. But we had a couple of obstacles in the road. One was no bands would give us any songs because all bands were recording their records, and so they didn't have any extra songs. They wanted to put all the songs on their records. And the next thing, when we priced how much it cost to do a flexi disc, it was an outrageous amount of money because you had to do a minimum of something like, I think it was 10,000 flexi discs. Like you had to do a lot of them. You couldn't just do a few hundred flexi discs. The minimum order was 10,000. So we're like, well, we can't do a flexi disc. But we really wanted to put a record in the magazine. So that's when we did Project X. We kind of had the idea we were just going to do this fake band. And so me and Walter and Al Brown and Sammy got together. We wrote the songs in a few days, and we recorded them at Don Fury's really quick. And then we put that actual 7-inch in Schism, just as kind of like a freebie for the magazine to make the magazine cooler. But people loved that 7-inch so much. And we put Schism Records on the back of it because Schism was a fanzine, but people loved that record so much that we had to repress it. and then we had to repress it again. And then all this money came in from the Project X record. So we just said, why don't we just do a record? We'll just make this into a real record label. And then the next record we put out was the Judge 7-inch, New York Crew. And that kept selling. We'd press 1,000. We'd sell 1,000 practically at one show. And then we take that money, we go back, we press 3,000. They would fly, they would sell really quick. And, we were our mail order, people were ordering all the time. So it was just like, wow, we can actually do this as a real record label. And I wish we kept doing it because it was so exciting to put out these records and actually to put out records of the bands that you loved. And, it's nice because I'm so indebted to record labels like Discord, the Minor Threat record label, and like Exclaim Records in Boston that put out so many great records that I love, and BYO Records and Positive Force Records, and all these labels that put out all this great hardcore music. And it was so nice to do your own label. You felt like you were really contributing something. Like, we want to give back some music to the scene. We've been inspired by so many records and so many record labels. Let's try to do something where we can kind of also give back. So it was a nice way to just kind of bring all this great music that was going on in New York City and around that area at the time, and give it to the world. That was probably the most exciting thing about it.
John, War on Illusion is one of your latest releases, and I would like to know the response from the audience to it.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was a fanzine that I did during Shelter. So Shelter, we were all living in the temple. And it was at a time where, people didn't really know what Krishna was. They didn't know what Krishna consciousness was. They didn't know what, it was a really weird time. Like in the early 90s, it's not like it is now. Like, now, if anybody goes to the doctor and they're like, yeah, doctor, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have, the doctor will say, okay, well, meditate. The doctor will recommend to you meditation. Like meditation has become such a mainstream thing. And like yoga, the doctor will tell you, oh, you want to exercise? Do yoga. It's great. You get to stretch your body. It's so healthy to do. It wasn't like that in the early 90s. In the early 90s, meditation was super weird. Yoga was weird. Anything that had to do with like the yoga scene or meditation or chanting on beads or any of that stuff was considered just like you were a weirdo. And so I think when Shelter first came out, people didn't know what to make of it. And so we wanted to have a way for kids in the scene to understand what Shelter was about, to understand what Krishna consciousness was about. Because sometimes if you just give a 16-year-old kid the Bhagavad Gita, they're going to read it, but they're not going to really understand it. It's a pretty heavy book of philosophy. So unless you have guides and, people to teach you, you're not really going to get much out of the book. So I wanted to do a fanzine that kind of explained it in hardcore terms that any kind of hardcore kid could understand, just to kind of explain what the whole band and the whole philosophy was about. And so I did War and Illusion. And I did a few issues, and just recently End Hits Records, this record label that put out the last couple of they repressed the last couple of Shelter records. They compiled them all together in a book, and that just came out a few months ago. And I'm really very proud of it, actually. So if you want to order that, you can go to endhitsrecords.com, or you can go to their Instagram, which is end_hits_records on Instagram, and you can ask them how to order it. And we have shirts and we have sweatshirts, and you can get them all in a big package together. And it was really cool because after rereading it for, I hadn't read it in a really long time. I'm pretty proud of it, how it came out. So that's the latest thing that's come out that I've been working on.
So John, you've been playing these bands that change people's life, man. And you've been all over the world and meeting kids from different places, backgrounds. cultures, ethnicities. And what happens inside you when you see a tattoo of an album you played in, the logo of a band? What's going through your mind when you see that after all these years?
You know, it's so weird because when we started Youth of Today, we had no idea that what it was going to turn into. I kind of figured, well, I'll do this band for like a year and then I'm going to go to college and I'm just going to become like a normal person. But I don't know. It's just like Youth of Today, it became such a big thing. And I just kind of rode that wave. But I never, you know, if you had told me when Youth of Today started, man, there's going to be kids 30 years from now that are going to be into Youth of Today. They're still getting the Youth of Today tattoos. I would have been like, what are you talking about? You're like, I never would have believed it. You know, it's something that's just really cool about music. Like, music touches people's hearts, you know? And I'm really super humbled and super just happy that something that I did could inspire kids out there. Because let me tell you, there's been so many bands that have changed my life completely. Minor Threat, 7 Seconds, Youth Brigade, SSD, Agnostic Front, the Cro-Mags, you know, so many bands, their music meant so much to me. And it literally changed the course of my life. The Dead Kennedys, you know, MDC. And so to be able to kind of do that for other kids, it's a really special thing for me. And I'm really glad that I didn't go to college. I kind of blew off, you know, education and, you know, getting a good job early and stuff like that, because I feel like the stuff that we did and the music that we put out, it really mattered. And I think we put out a really good message in this world. And it's funny because, you know, Youth of Today still plays. We're going on tour in the summer this year. And it's almost as if like the things that Youth of Today were singing about back then, they're as relevant, maybe even more relevant to kids these days. And so I think it's something that really, you know, it's a message that's timeless and it's universal. And I'm just super humbled and grateful that we can still, you know, play music and you know, make music and play. It's the greatest feeling in the world.
John, that's pretty much it. Did you have a good time?
Yes, I did. I'd also like to say, you know, I teach yoga. And so I teach yoga every day online. If anybody wants to take class with me, it's a pretty hard class. It's a super physical class. You'll sweat, you'll get stronger. Some people think that yoga is just stretching and it's very easy. Not the yoga that I do. It's very physical, very challenging. It's a very good workout. So that's at 10 o'clock New York time every single day, Monday through Saturday. I take Sunday off. And it's really cool because we'll have a little talk about, you know, kind of yoga stories and different like lessons from yoga stories and maybe some things from the Bhagavad Gita right at the beginning of the class. And then we'll do a little chanting. We'll do just like a few minutes of chanting. And then the rest of the time is a really super strong yoga class. And it's going great. There's a lot of hardcore kids that log on and punk rockers and stuff like that. And people from all around the world take the class. So if you want to take the class, look me up on Instagram. My Instagram handle is The Hardcore Yogi, all one word, The Hardcore Yogi. And if you're interested in taking my yoga class, just send me a DM and I'll give you all the information and you can practice yoga with me. And then I also want to say that I am doing a new band. I've been working on it all year, all last year, even before last year. And so that's coming out really soon. It's like a melodic hardcore band. It's got a girl singer and we haven't really decided on a name yet. We're throwing around a couple of different names, but we're almost finished recording. So that's going to come out. That's going to come out this year too. So look out for that. I got a new band coming out. And then also we're going to work on a new Shelter record this year also. So stay tuned for that too.